Okay, the Presidency, Chapter 12, page 356. We are now on Presidential Leadership of Congress, the Politics of Shared Power. Along with the responsibility for running, let's get this straight here, the executive branch, presidents must also deal intensively with the legislative branch. They don't really have to, but okay. Near the top of any presidential job description would be working with Congress. The American system of separation of powers is actually one of shared powers. So presidents are to succeed in leaving their stamp on public policy. They must devote much of their time in office to leading the legislature in order to gain support for their initiatives. Again, that's argumentative. You could just go through executive order, which is what's been going on in recent years. You could go back to even Obama. This effort requires wielding constitutional powers, building party coalitions, which is the key one, building party coalitions, exploiting popular support, and exercising legislative skills. Chief legislature. Nowhere does the Constitution use the phrase chief legislator. It is strictly a phrase invented to emphasize the executive's importance in the legislative process. The Constitution simply requires that the president give a State of the Union report to Congress. It doesn't have to be yearly, by the way, it doesn't have to be a speech, and instructs the president to bring other matters to Congress's attention from time to time. But in actuality, the president plays a major role in shaping the congressional agenda. You'll hear when I'm reading, at the time of me reading this, Biden is put the COVID legislation under President Biden has been Biden's legislation. That's said often. But what's really going on is the leadership in both the House and Senate, which would be at this time Pelosi and Schumer, and as well as the White House, many parts of the White House staff were working on creating that legislation. Some would even complain that both Democrats and Republicans, that over time now, regular Congress members have been shut out. That big legislation now is done by the president's staff as well as the leadership of the House and Senate, which was never arguably the original intent. The Constitution also gives the president power to veto congressional legislation. Once Congress passes a bill, the president may sign it, veto it with reasons for rejecting, let it become law after 10 working days by not doing anything. Congress can pass a vetoed law, however, if 2/3 of each House votes to override the president. In cases where Congress adjourns within 10 days of submitting a bill, the president can use a pocket veto. That is, simply let it die by neither signing nor vetoing it. Here's the chart on pocket vetoes. I couldn't tell you why Eisenhower has so many. Then you go down to Obama. This book was written right when Trump became president, or was elected, actually. Why his were less. But there's a history there, obviously. The presidential veto is usually effective. Congress has overridden only about 4% of all vetoed bills since the nation's founding. Thus, even the threat of a presidential veto can be an effective tool for persuading Congress to give more weight to the president's views. On the other hand, the veto is a blunt instrument. Presidents must accept or reject bills in their entirety. They cannot veto only the parts they do not like. In contrast, most governors have a line item veto, allowing them to veto particular portions of a bill. Our governor, the Michigan governor, has a line item veto. You can imagine how frustrating that can be to a Republican legislature when you have a Democratic governor. As a result, the White House often must accept provisions of a bill it opposes in order to obtain provisions that it desires, whereas the governor can just cross things off. I don't know what the law is. I'm sure it's more specific than that. But when our governor gets a bill to sign, she can just reject portions of it. And so she doesn't have to compromise all that much if it gets to her in the first place. Presidents cannot do that. They try to argue for it. No. In fact, I think it might even gone to court that it would be unconstitutional. In recent years, presidents have issued statements when they sign bills saying they will not comply with certain provisions and, in fact, vetoing parts of the bill. So a signing statement, which George W. Bush was known for, was, okay, yeah, I'm signing this bill into law, but I don't understand this. I don't see this part of the law the same as you do. Effectively doing a quasi line item veto. Uh, that was talked about a lot under George W. Bush's presidency, and obviously the Democrats were frustrated with that. Maybe some Republicans too. I couldn't tell you. I haven't heard about it since. I haven't heard about it with Obama. I don't think many bills after the first 2 years even got to Obama, nor did I hear about it with Trump. Trump was more executive orders. Not sure about Obama. There are some bills, such as those appropriating or giving funds for national defense, that must be passed. Knowing this, the president may veto a version containing provisions he opposes on the theory that Congress does not want to be held responsible for failing to defend the nation. That we just looked at. That was the defense reauthorization bill, and they overrode the veto to pass that. Nevertheless, the presidential veto is an inherently negative resource. It is most useful for preventing legislation. Much of the time, however, presidents are more interested in passing their own legislation. To do so, they must marshal their political resources to obtain positive support for their programs. Presidents' three most useful resources are their party leadership, public support, and their own legislative skills. Now we're going to go over party leadership, public support, legislative skills. That last sentence was the prep for these next three parts. Party leadership. No matter what other resources presidents may have at their disposal, they remain highly dependent on their party to move their legislative programs. You saw this under Trump. You'll see this now under Biden. That political party having control, your political party having control of Congress is a big deal. Much more so in modern times. Representatives and senators of the president's party usually form the nucleus of coalitions supporting presidential proposals and provide considerably more support than do members of the opposition party. Thus, every president must provide party leadership in Congress, countering the natural tendency toward conflict between the executive and legislative branch that is inherent in the government systems of checks and balances. And I've said this before in class, the goal was always the conflict was between Congress and the president, that was the check. Now it's Republican versus Democrat. That's the check. The bond of party. For most senators and representatives of the president's party, being in the same political party as the president creates a psychological bond. Personal loyalties or emotional commitments to their party and their party leader, a desire to avoid embarrassing their administration and thus hurting their chances for a re-election, and a basic distrust of the opposition party are inclinations that produce support for the White House. Members of the same party also agree on many matters of public policy, and they are often supported by similar electoral coalitions, reinforcing the pull of party ties. So they're all, the party's tight. These members also feel they have a collective stake in the president's success. Of course, the opposition party has incentives to resist the president. Thus, presidential leadership demarcates and deepens cleavages in Congress. So makes deeper disagreements and dislike and distrust. The parties tend to be more cohesive on issues on which the president has taken a stand. So the president takes a stand, the opposition party almost always takes the opposite, and no matter what their view was in the past, they now the president's party takes a stand with the president. If presidents could rely on their party members to vote for whatever the White House set up to Capitol Hill, presidential leadership of Congress would be rather easy. All presidents would have to do is make sure members of their party showed up to vote. If the party had the majority, presidents would always win. If their party was in the minority, presidents would only have to concentrate on converting a few members of the other party. Things are not so simple. I would say it's getting rougher, that this is getting more simple, that you're finding real cohesiveness, that the Democrats will vote for the Bidens, the Republicans will not, and vice versa with Trump. But they're going to argue here in the book that that there is slippage. Things are not so simple, however. Despite the pull of party ties, all presidents experience at least some slippage in the support of their party in Congress. Because presidents cannot always count on their own party members for support, even on key votes. They must be active party leaders and devote their efforts to conversion as much as to mobilization of members of their party. I don't know if that's true right now with the conversion part. You could write a book about that. The primary obstacle to party unity is the lack of consensus on policies among party members, especially in the Democratic Party. That is true. Carter, a Democrat, remarked, "I learned the hard way that there was no party loyalty or discipline when a complicated or controversial issue was at stake. None." Democrats are known to be a little more divisive within their party, for good or bad. When George W. Bush proposed reforming Social Security and immigration, many congressional Republicans refused to support him. That's true too. George Bush wanted to work and get that done, and it didn't go anywhere. Didn't go anywhere under Obama. Stalled under Trump. Biden will probably try. Immigration's a long problem as far as updating law for immigration. Likewise, when Obama negotiated deals with Republicans on taxes in 2010 and spending in 2011, many congressional Democrats voted against him, and many opposed the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement in 2016. Many Democrats might have been against it, but Trump's the one that actually came in and pulled us out of that, the TPP. I don't know if we're moving back towards that or not. This diversity of views often reflects the diversity of constituencies represented by party members. For decades, the defections of conservative and moderate Democrats from Democratic presidents was a prominent feature of American politics. When constituency opinion and the president's proposals conflict, members of Congress are more likely to vote with their constituents, whom they rely on for re-election. Moreover, if the president is not popular with their constituencies, congressional party members may avoid identifying too closely with the White House. So you could see that with like Fred Upton, who is a representative of the Kalamazoo area in Southwest Michigan. He has more Democrats in his district than Bill Huizenga, ours does. So he acts more moderate, and he's not as quick. He wasn't so like absolutely supportive of Trump. He had to work a fine line. His constituency was different. It's not considered, while I would consider it a safe seat, it is not the safest seat. One of the reasons, arguably, that Fred Upton does have a safe seat is he does walk that moderate line. Okay, leading the party. The president has some assets as party leader, including congressional party leaders, services and amenities for party members, and campaign aid. Each asset is of limited utility, however. The president's relationship with party leaders in Congress is a delicate one. So think of Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump. Now it's Schumer and Pelosi and Biden. Although the leaders are predisposed to support presidential policies and typically work closely with the White House, they are free to oppose the president or lend only symbolic support. Some party leaders may be ineffective themselves. Moreover, party leaders, especially in the Senate, are not in strong positions to reward or discipline members of Congress. Pelosi and the House leadership is. They can kick you off committees. To create goodwill with congressional party members, the White House provides them with many amenities, ranging from photographs with the president to rides on Air Force One. Perhaps more important, districts represented by members of the president's party receive more federal outlays than those represented by opposition party members. Although these largesse may earn the president the benefit of the doubt on some policy initiatives, party members consider it their right to receive such favors from the White House, and as a result are unlikely to be especially responsive to the president's largesse. In addition to offering a carrot, the president can, of course, wield a stick in the form of withholding favors, but this is rarely done. Trump was good at this one, though. He used his Twitter account to praise those who supported him and to attack those who didn't. And Republican legislative leaders, as well as Republican members of Congress, were very aware of that. We're very aware that his approval or disapproval would affect how their Republican constituency saw them. If party members wish to oppose the White House, the president can do little to stop them. The parties are highly decentralized. National party leaders do not control those aspects of politics that are of vital concern to members of Congress, nominations and elections. Members of Congress are largely self-recruited. They choose themselves, gain their party's nomination by their own efforts and not the parties. Now, this was another chapter, remember, that the parties don't really have as much say and hold on who their nominations are. There's a whole chapter on that. And provide most of the money and organizational support for their elections. So people fundraise themselves now. Presidents can do little to influence the results of these activities. One way for the president to improve the chances of obtaining support in Congress is to increase the number of fellow party members in the legislature. The phenomenon of presidential coattails occurs when voters cast their ballots for congressional candidates of the presidential party because those candidates support the president. That did not happen in 2020. There was actually a drop in the House of Democrats. Now, Biden wasn't the president yet, but the Republicans actually gained seats in the House. The change in party balance that usually emerges when the electoral dust has settled is strikingly small, however. In the 17 presidential elections between 1952 and 2016, the party of the winning presidential candidate averaged a net gain of 8 seats. Again, they lost this one per election in the House and only 1 seat in the Senate, where the opposition party actually gained seats in 8 of the elections. I'd also add, so this is why they are working with this COVID law, this COVID package. Biden, Kamala Harris, others are going to you should see them start actively campaigning, going across and advertising for the benefits of this package. Some Democrats think that Obama didn't do that enough. He didn't, as I read in one article, toot his own horn enough on the package that was done after the Great Recession. I don't know. I mean, I'm not always a fan. It's politicking. The idea, though, is Biden goes across the U.S., keeps his approval rating high, or can possibly manage to get to higher, I don't know, and make sure that the voters connect him and the Democrats to that COVID package and things that happen well, so that when the midterm election comes, the goal is that the Democrats don't lose seats and lose control of the House and Senate like they did under Obama back in 2010. At this time of me reading this, I have no idea what will happen. Recent presidents have campaigned actively for their party's candidates in midterm elections. And there's evidence that they reap benefits from those members who win. Nevertheless, the president's party typically loses seats. And there's a table. For example, in 1986, the Republicans lost 8 seats in the Senate, depriving Reagan of a majority. And in 1994, the Democrats lost 8 seats and 52 House seats, in the process losing control of both houses. The president's party is especially likely to lose seats in the House when the president's approval rating is low and when the party gained a lot of seats in the previous election. That's what happened then in 2016. The House in 2017 was controlled by the Republicans, so they had the House, Senate, and the presidency. But then in 2018 election, the House moved back to the Democrats. But a lot of the seats that the Democrats won in 2018 were really very close and unstable. And then consequently, and I couldn't tell you the numbers here, but Republicans won them back. In the Democrats suffered large losses in the 2010 midterm, including 6 seats in the Senate, 63 in the House. In 2014, Democrats lost 9 seats in the Senate and 13 in the House. So that was under Obama. As this discussion suggests, the president's party often lacks a majority in one or both houses. Since 1953, there have been 30 years in which Republican presidents faced a Democratic House of Reps and 22 years in which they faced a Democratic Senate. things were different then, though. The Republicans and the Democrats were getting along under different ideas. That doesn't mean there weren't issues like the Civil Rights era, Vietnam, but it was a different time. Democrat Clinton faced both the House and a Senate with Republican majorities from 95 through 2000. Obama had to deal with a Republican majority 2011 to 2016, Senate 2015, 2016. Lacking majorities and or dependable party support, the president usually has to solicit help from the opposition party. This is often a futile endeavor. However, since the opposition is generally not fertile ground for seeking support, oh, I read that wrong. Read it with a period, not a comma. Nevertheless, even a few votes may be enough to give the president the required majority. Public support. One of the president's most important resources for leading Congress is public support. Presidents who enjoy the backing of the public have an easier time influencing Congress. Said one top aide to Reagan, everything here is built on the idea that the president's success depends on grassroots support. Grassroots, think of grass, the roots of grass. It's the average people. Presidents with low approval ratings in the polls find it difficult to influence Congress. As one of President Carter's aides put it when the president was low in the polls, no president whose popularity is as low as this president's has much clout on the Hill. Members of Congress and others in Washington closely watch two indicators of public support: approval in the polls and mandates in presidential elections. But if you remember from another chapter, mandates don't really exist. They just claim them. Members of Congress anticipate the public's reactions to their support for or opposition to presidents and their policies. They may choose to be close to or independent of the White House, depending on the president's standing with the public, to increase their chances for re-election. Representatives and senators may also use the president's standing in the polls as an indicator of presidential ability to mobilize public opinion against presidential opponents. One idea that is different under Trump that you won't see here, and I don't know if it's good or bad, time will tell. Usually there's an idea that if you don't have a lot of support, you need to build your base. You have your base, your supporters that you've got with you, and then you need to pick off some independents and build your base beyond just the base when it comes to getting support for your initiatives, when it comes to getting support to make sure you re-election and other people your party win. Trump went a different direction. He went with I'm sticking with my base and my base only, and I'm only supporting members who are with me. We are not going to look to extend the size of my my support of my voting support. Now, you could also argue back that it wouldn't matter anyway, that no matter what he did or changed, would he get more support? So why bother if they weren't going to change their minds anyway? We'll see only over time whether the Republicans going with that strategy can strengthen them or weaken them. Not sure. Public approval also makes the president's other leadership resources more efficacious. I'm going to look up that word. Just means effective. Resources more effective. If the president is high in the public's esteem, the president's party is more likely to be responsive, the public is more easily moved, and the legislative skills become more effective. Thus, public approval is the political resource that has the most potential to turn a stalemate between the president and Congress into a situation supportive of the president's legislative proposals. And you'll see this with Biden and how he'll use that strategy. Now, with negative partisanship, I'm not sure how effective it is anymore. We'll see. Widespread public support gives the president leeway and weakens resistance to presidential policies. It provides a cover for members of Congress to cast votes to which their constituents might otherwise object. They can defend their votes as support for the president rather than support for a certain policy alone. Conversely, lack of public support narrows the range in which presidential policies receive the benefit of the doubt and strengthens the resolve of the president's opponents. Low ratings in the polls may also create incentives to attack the president, further eroding a weakened position. For example, after the U.S. occupation of Iraq turned sour and the country rejected his proposal to reform Social Security, It became more acceptable in Congress and in the press to raise questions about Bush's capacities as president. Disillusionment is a difficult force for the White House to combat, because remember, George W. was president in September 11th. It was hard to it was not in your best right after September 11th. It was not to the advantage, and many actually criticized the media for this, to say anything negative or push back on anything because of his high public support. The impact of public approval or disapproval on the support the president receives in Congress is important, but it occurs at the margins of the effort to build coalitions behind proposed policies. No matter how low presidential standings dip, the president still receives support from a substantial number of senators and reps, which gets back to that party connections. Similarly, no matter how high approval levels climb, a significant portion of Congress will still oppose certain presidential policies. Members of Congress are unlikely to vote against the clear interests of their constituencies or the firm tenets of their ideology out of deference to a widely supported chief executive. So, if they don't believe in it or their constituents don't agree, they're not going to side with a popular president. George W. Bush enjoyed very high public approval following the terrorist attacks September 11th, but Democrats typically do not support his domestic policy proposals. Public approval gives the president leverage, not command. In addition, presidents cannot depend on having the approval of the public, and it is not a resource over which they have much control. Once again, it is clear that presidents' leadership resources do not allow them to dominate Congress. The results of presidential elections are another indicator of public opinion regarding presidents. An electoral mandate, the perception that the voters strongly support the president and his policies, can be a powerful symbol in American politics. It accords added legitimacy and credibility to the newly elected president's proposals. Moreover, concerns for both representation and political survival encourage members of Congress to support new presidents if they feel the people have spoken. Moreover, more importantly, mandates change the premise of decisions. Following Roosevelt's decisive win in 1932, the essential question became how government should act to fight the Depression rather than whether it should act. Similarly, following Johnson's overwhelming win in 1964, the dominant question in Congress was not whether to pass new social programs, but how many social programs to pass and how much to increase spending. In 1981, the tables were turned. Reagan's victory placed a stigma on big government and exalted the unregulated marketplace and large defense efforts. Reagan had won a major victory even before the first congressional vote. Although presidential elections can structure choices for Congress, merely winning an election does not provide presidents with a mandate. Every election produces a winner, but mandates are much less common. Even large electoral victories, such as Nixon's in 1972 and Reagan's in 1984, carry no guarantee that Congress will interpret the results as mandates from the people to support the president's programs. Perceptions of a mandate are weak if the winning candidate did not stress his policy plans in the campaign, as in 1972 and 1984, or if the voters also elected majorities in Congress from the other party. And of course, like they say, the winner may claim a mandate anyway. Now, don't forget that this section I'm reading about public support all comes down to his leadership in Congress. So we're talking about whether or not a claimed electoral mandate, claimed public approval, all whether or not they help him in Congress. That's where this approval can affect outcomes in Congress. And then they noted that his role is vetoing, the being able to threaten a veto, and then as well as party leadership. His party, trying to keep his party with him. Biden has won. He's got 50 people in the Democrats in the Senate, but Manchin, who is from West Virginia, which went overwhelmingly for Donald Trump, Manchin is a Democrat in a very Republican state. So that 50th vote is key to Biden being able to be successful, and he needs to frame his legislation to help get Manchin to support. And then there's also the filibuster, and there is discussion right now whether or not they want to get rid of the filibuster. Filibuster means you need 60 votes in the Senate to pass something, which they do not have. So for the next section, I will go over, again, under the same content, the of how to work with Congress. So public opinion, party connections, veto power, but also the last one is legislative skills right here. And the actual maneuvering with members of Congress. I'll start that up on the next section.